This is a CBC podcast.
I'm Rob Norman.
I'm Andrew Norton, and the Personal Best podcast is back for Season 2.
All right. Well, this is exciting.
I wasn't ready to do this, but I'm going to give it my all.
Whoa! Holy frick!
Personal Best Season 2, a self-improvement show for people who don't like self-improvement.
Subscribe now wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Danse, Anine, Bonjour, hello, and welcome. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild.
I think Alanis is really the fundamental reason why we still have a National Film Board in Canada. I think that her importance to the NFB can never be overstated. Her influence is just enormous.
And I always thought about Alanis telling me that she wanted to see the story of my grandmother.
Everybody can tell stories. Our people have been telling stories for a very long time. Yeah. So I'm just one of them.
Today on Unreserved, I sit down with legendary Abenaki filmmaker Alanis Obomsawin at her office at the National Film Board in Montreal, where she's worked for more than 50 years. But first, the impact of Alanis Obomsawin's work on Indigenous cinema. When I was looking for someone to talk about the impact of Alanis's work, of course I thought of Jesse Wente. Jesse is director of the National Indigenous Screen Office and has a personal connection with Alanis's work. He joins me from Toronto. Hello, Jesse.
Hi, Rosanna.
Good to hear your voice.
Yes, same here.
So tell me, when did you first come across Alanis Obomsawin's work?
I actually remember it quite vividly. I want to say it was 1984, and I watched a movie she had made, came on TV, a short documentary called The Incident at Restigouche, in which she plays a quite prominent on-screen role, as well as, of course, her classic voiceover narration. And I watched this movie, and it was the first movie I had ever seen that had someone who looked like my grandmother in it, and who was talking. And she was really holding truth to power, speaking truth to power in that movie. And I was just struck. It had never really occurred to me that outside of Westerns, where Indigenous people were always, sort of the other, not the central characters, I had never thought that Indigenous people could be in movies, or that it would be movies like this, or that this sort of movie could actually exist. And I think for me, as a kid who had grown up really watching, Star Wars and all those sorts of movies, that moment was when I realized that cinema could be so much more than that.
And what impact did that have on you when you had that realization where, Indigenous people in film? Speaking? What?
It made me want to make movies.
Yeah.
If you speak to me and frankly, a whole generation of Indigenous people who now work in movies or around movies, it was Alanis that gave us, I don't quite want to say permission, but maybe that's what it was, to dream that we could actually have a place in this industry. And I've now spent 25 years in the movie business, and I think it's all Alanis.
Mm-hmm. I remember absolutely thinking that this is permission or inspiration, or this sudden realization, as you had mentioned, that we can do this, and that was a gift she gave many storytellers.
Yeah, and I think a gift that she's still giving to many storytellers, and she's really the grandmother of Indigenous cinema, maybe just the mother of Indigenous cinema. Her and Merita Mita, who was a Maori filmmaker who similarly made activism-based documentaries in the late 70s, early 80s, exactly like Alanis did. They both sort of came from the same roots, even though they were half a world away. Activists, storytellers first, came to documentary almost out of necessity or need to tell these stories, and in doing so, created what I think what we would now recognize as global Indigenous cinema. And of course, I think the way Indigenous cinema exists now is deeply reflective of these two individuals. The fact that they started as activists in the community, that they were so attentive to the idea of accountability to the community, and that they were women. I think all of that still bears fruit in our community now. I mean, the amazing thing about the Indigenous screen community, and there's many, as you know, Rosanna, but one of them is that in our side of the screen sector, there are more women filmmakers, more women producers than in the non-Indigenous side of the sector. And I think that Alanis is the reason why that's true. And I think that's an incredibly important and powerful thing, just her being her and Merita, not purposefully, but they did really start an entire global movement of Indigenous cinema that still exists and persists and is growing and will even grow further in the coming years. It's amazing.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, at 86 years old, Alanis is currently making her 53rd documentary. I don't know if the word legendary is enough to encompass her influence. How would you describe her influence?
You're right. I don't know if legendary actually does cover it. Icon, her influence is just enormous. Her influence on Indigenous cinema, I think, is quite obvious. But I want to take it even beyond that for a second. I think Alanis is really the fundamental reason why we still have a national film board in Canada. I think that her importance to the NFB can never be overstated. Mm-hmm. She's provided their raison d'etre for the last 30 years. I think that's incredibly important. But also the style of documentary and her approach, I think, has been hugely influential. You can't help but feel the echoes, the reverberations of the approach that Alanis has taken to storytelling in a whole host of films at the NFB, but also globally. I often call her cinema the cinema of listening because Alanis starts her process not visually. She starts with a tape recorder and in interviews. And she actually starts even before she introduces the tape recorder by going to these communities to talk to them and to listen to them, which is so powerful for communities that have not been listened to for so long, to have someone listen to them, but then translate that to the screen to where when you're actually watching an Alanis film, it's as much about what you're hearing, what you're listening to, her voice, the voices of the people that she chooses to feature in the films is as important as the visuals of her movies. And I think that has had a profound impact on how documentaries just globally are produced. I think many, many filmmakers emulate that sort of approach and that style of telling those stories. So I think it reaches even beyond just the Indigenous community and the Indigenous side of the film sector. I think she has truly influenced Canadian cinema and global cinema as well.
A couple of years ago, when Canada was marking 150 years since Confederation, you curated a series. It was 5 short films that responded to another icon, Buffy Sainte-Marie's call for Canada to, quote, keep calm and decolonize. Here's a clip of Buffy introducing this series for CBC Arts.
Hi, I'm Buffy Sainte-Marie. I've always believed that art can be a powerful way to invite new ideas and to break the cycles of bullying, drug abuse, alcohol, and the pecking order. I use the phrase stay calm and decolonize as a call to communicate what you think, create what nobody thought was possible, and to distribute new ways of thinking and doing things. You're about to watch 5 short films from some of Canada's most distinguished filmmakers. Some of their stories might make you laugh and some might make you angry, but hopefully they'll all inspire you to imagine new ways forward.
That was Buffy Sainte-Marie calling on Canada to keep calm and decolonize. Alanis Obomsawin made a film in response to that call. It's called Walking is Medicine. And Jesse, you wrote about that film saying Obomsawin takes just more than 5 minutes to blast us with wisdom and resistance in the form of a short story that encapsulates her half-century of decolonization. What was the short story she told, and can you tell me about that blast of wisdom you spoke of?
Sure. She told a story about water walkers and a specific walk by youth. And she used the title Walking is Medicine to remind us the power of moving on the land and the idea of movement forward, of always progressing. I think her whole career is an act of decolonization, an act of decolonization of our screens, of our institutions when it comes to, say, the National Film Board or even the CBC, but most importantly, a decolonization of our thoughts and how we think and see the world. Her films demand that we see the world through her perspective and through her subject's perspective. Her whole career is about giving voice to those that haven't been voiceless. It's that they haven't had the microphone. And she's the one that has shown up and provided the microphone. And in a way that she has reshaped, I think, how Canada and Canadians actually see themselves and understand themselves. And, if we looked at her most famous film, the Ganasatake film, 270 Years of Resistance, without that picture, we as a country would have a fundamentally different interpretation of the events that occurred during that summer. We would fundamentally think of it differently because she was in a place that mainstream media was not. She was telling the story that other venues simply either purposefully or just by circumstance weren't going to tell. And she told it. And we now understand that in a way that we just wouldn't. And I think that has completely shaped and influenced how the country's actually moved forward since then. I think it's important, Rosanna, not just to look at the film, but what it meant and what it continues to mean, that film. And that's why I would put that importance on it. It altered the course of history, the making of that film and the exhibition of that film, and her being the one that made it. Is there another movie that so lays bare the relationship, the fraught relationship that is Canada? It's just remarkable. We'll be watching and learning from that movie forever.
As well as her amazing work on film, she also does a lot of amazing work behind the scenes. What role do you think Alanis played in establishing and supporting Indigenous cinema in Canada?
Oh, huge. I mean, besides the sort of inspirational element that you and I talked about earlier, she sat on advisories and boards and all sorts of things right across the country. She's a mentor to many throughout the industry. She's incredibly generous with her time, considering that I've never, in all the years I've known her, I've never known her to not be making a movie. Not a day has gone by where she's not making a movie. And she finds time. And I think she's been hugely instrumental to the building of the Indigenous screen community, the Indigenous movie industry. She gave us permission not just to tell our stories, but to thrive, to stand up and hear and let our voices be heard and spoken. So it's weird for me as a former film critic to gush over any filmmaker. I will always gush over Alanis.
Your affection for her is very clear, coming across very loud and clear. A beautiful history, right?
A beautiful history. I attend her birthday parties. She's one of very few people that sends me a note every one of my birthdays. She's one of my most cherished people on the planet.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Jesse, for speaking with me today.
Oh, thank you, Rosanna. I love being on the show, and Miigwech for always having me on.
Thank you so much, Jesse. That's very nice of you. Jesse Wente is the director of the National Indigenous Screen Office. We asked Indigenous filmmakers to call in and leave us a short message about how Alanis has impacted their work. Here's a call we got from Cree filmmaker and our favorite nerd, Sonia Ballantyne.
Hey, this is Sonia Ballantyne, and I'm calling in to talk about the impact Alanis had on my life. I was in a program where I was making a movie about my grandmother, Virginia, called Gnosticism. And in the movie, I go to a lot of dark places regarding our relationship and how lost I felt with the idea of never really knowing who she was. And Alanis was one of the mentors in that program where I was making notes with them. And I remember during the program I was crying a lot and saying, like, I don't want to make my grandmother the villain of this story. And it was just very hard for me because, like, it's such a personal project. And I remember Alanis was talking to me about how important it was to tell these types of stories. But I distinctly remember when Alanis told me, well, I just calmed down from crying, that she wanted to see the story of my granny. And I always remember that even in the aftermath of the editing where we had to edit a bunch more times. We had to edit it, go back to the start like 4 times, and I wanted to quit. And I always thought about Alanis telling me that she wanted to see the story of my grandmother. So yeah, that's my favorite memory of her. Alanis also requested a grad picture of my younger sister. So my sister ended up sending it to her, and I'm hoping it's now hanging in Alanis' office at the NFB.
That was Cree filmmaker Sonia Ballantyne. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild, talking all about filmmaker Alanis Obomsawin on the show today. A display of her work as a printmaker will be featured at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts this summer. The exhibit is called Alanis Obomsawin, Printmaker, An Artist and Her Nation. The Abenaki Basket Makers of Odanak opens June 7th and runs till August 25th. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. I'm in Alanis Obomsawin's office at the National Film Board in Montreal, where she's worked for more than 50 years. Her office is crowded with memorabilia from her work over the years. Movie posters, photographs, film canisters, bookshelves, overflowing with books and papers and binders. Her windowsill is lined with plants, and the sun is pouring in. Alanis is wrapping up her 52nd film and already at work on her 53rd, and she's made time to sit down with me today. But first, I wait. The excitement grows in my body as I can hear Alanis coming down the hallway. Hello, Alanis. So wonderful to see you again.
Oh, my God. So you're in my...
I'm in your space.
My space.
Marveling at all the wonders in here.
Well, my office looks like my house. I've been working here all these years. And I keep things, you know. One time somebody threw some of my stuff in the garbage, and I went to pick it up in the garbage and brought it back in here. And there's a lot of archives of my work here over the years, and it's quite special.
Yeah,
I'm glad they can't see the mess.
It's the mess of a busy person, I would say.
I don't loaf.
Let's talk about when you started making film and the discovery of film and the love for film. When did you discover film, and why do you love it so much?
It wasn't not my idea. I was singing mostly at the time and talking to children in the classroom all over the country. I was doing a lot of tours, mainly because I was revolting against the educational system, especially concerning the history of this country. And this was my reason. That's how I started to work in education. And in 1961, I guess, 62, I was campaigning to build a swimming pool on my reserve. Someone made a film about what I was doing. And from there, some people at the film board saw it and invited me to come here. And they said, tell us stories like you do in the classroom. So it was easy.
Did you realize or understand that you were probably one of the only Indigenous filmmakers in Canada?
Yeah.
And how did you feel about being one of the very few Indigenous storytellers telling stories in this way?
It was a very difficult time because, first of all, you have to think at that time it was really a man's world. There was not many women, period, making films. I was at the bottom of the line, really. Since then, there's been so much change. And I think there's an ear from all Canadians to really listen to us.
So in the early days and being one of the few Indigenous storytellers telling stories on film, what did you draw on? Where did you get your inspiration from?
Oh, our own people. You don't have to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter who you talk to. Everyone has a story, and it's very special.
You grew up in Odanak, the Abenaki Reserve northeast of Montreal. Can you describe for me what life was like for you?
At that time, it was very different than what it is now. First of all, we didn't have a sidewalk, like we had an earth road. And the reserve is about 1 mile long by 4 miles. But in those days, everything was happening on that 1 mile. Every house you went to, you could smell the sweetgrass and the ash. Women were making baskets out of splint from the ash and sweetgrass. And in some areas, they would dye the splints different colors, and they would hang them on the line. It was so nice. So every house you went to, this is what I miss now. You could smell the sweetgrass. It just bring you so much comfort. And all the women were busy. And as a young girl, very young, I learned how to braid the sweetgrass so that they could weave it in the basket. And the men made birch bark canoes. And a lot of them made sculptures also. So it was a very busy village in terms of everyone having a job. It's not like that anymore. And there was a lot of singing also. And nobody locked their doors. So us as children, you could go in and out anywhere, and you were always welcome. So that's not that kind of life now.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. I understand you were quite the mischief maker when you were little, that you'd like to squeeze into the chicken coop when the hens were laying the eggs. We do research here.
Oh, my God. Yeah, where I lived, my aunt and uncle, they had chickens, and they had a horse and a cow and a garden. And I would always go in near the chicken coop, and I watch the chicken. And then and there was an area, they could go right inside like a stable. They could go inside, and the chicken have a way of perching themselves somewhere, and they're laying eggs. And I would sit there with the chicken, and I would imitate every sound they make. I just loved at the time doing that.
And why did you like spending time with the chickens?
I used to take things from the garden, which I was not supposed to, and I would eat it. And we had an apple tree and a plum tree. And I would eat an apple, and then I would throw the middle, so it was unknown that I'd stolen this apple. And the chicken would eat the rest, so
they were helping you out there.
Yeah.
And then life really changed for you when you moved to Trois-Rivières. How did life change for you there?
That's where I guess I learned that I was poor. It was very difficult. We were the only family there, Indigenous family. It was hard. This is why I'm here, because when I went to school in those days, when the teacher would open her book and say, L'Histoire du Canada, I knew I was going to get beat up that day. And in there, she would start reading that we were savages and that we went around scalping the poor whites when they came here, and that our language was Satan language. All those things was written, and we were learning it officially. And it took a while, but by the time I was 12, I decided that I wasn't going to get beat up anymore. And I changed. If you make a decision like that, people are still going to beat you up. So I develop a whole way what I was going to do when I go back to school. And my first law was when you go out to recreation, you stand by the brick wall and you don't move from there. So you know there's nobody behind. That was my first rule. And the kids would come and say, maudite sauvagesse sale, which means damn dirty Indian, savage. I would say, come closer, I can't hear you. I wouldn't leave the wall, And then I would fight back. First time I start fighting back. When I was 12.
These experiences that you've had growing up, first in your little village and then in Three Rivers, and the racism you faced, how is that reflected in the way you approach your work? Do you carry that with you?
The reason I'm doing it is because I didn't want other children to go through that. I want to make a better place. And to get respect for our children.
That influence can be seen in your first film, Christmas at Moose Factory, which was released in 1971 by the National Film Board. The film is told through the beautiful crayon drawings of kids in the Cree community. Let's take a listen to a bit of that film.
Moose Factory is on an island located in Moose River among the tidal flats of James Bay's lowlands, opposite Moosonee. The village has a population of about 1,500 people, Crees of the Algonquin Nation. The children of Moose Factory speak Swampy Cree and also English as their second language. Here, they speak with their drawings about life around them and how they feel when Christmas time comes.
This is my mother making bannock. She's ready to put it in the oven. When it's ready, we take one. I like to drink tea, coffee, orange juice, Coke, and ginger ale, and Pepsi, and homebrew. This is my house, and my grandmother's tent. This is me. I'm taking my dog for a walk.
That was a bit of Christmas at Moose Factory, a film by Alanis Obomsawin. Alanis, that was your first film. Why did you want to tell that story?
Well, it wasn't my story. When I first went to Moose Factory, it was a residential school, and I lived with the children in the residence, and they went to school in another building very close to it. So during the day, I would go to their classroom and tell them stories and sing for them. I play with them at the recreation time, run all over the place, so that they would know me very well. I was a friend. And to the point that at the end of a period, and I'd say, well, now it's your turn. You have to tell me stories. And they were so used to me, and they were so feeling free to speak the way they wanted. They all spoke Cree in those days. They all spoke their language, and English was the second language. So their accent in English was so beautiful. It was just poetry to me. And that's how I got them to tell me about themselves. And then I got them to make drawings about what they were saying.
And you still have the original drawings and paintings right here in your office today. Oh my gosh. Can you tell me about this picture?
67, 68. This is there must be a name behind, because I used to get them. Does it say the name? No. This is the children. Might be an 8-year-old who did this. And they made images about the holiday time, Christmas. And this is somebody with all the reindeer riding in their community in Moose Factory.
I can almost still smell the paint.
Yeah, isn't it lovely?
It's so beautiful.
Yes.
And so when you look at this picture now, what do you feel?
I see the children. And I was back in Moose Factory when I was working on Trick or Treaty.
Trick or Treaty, your documentary that was released in 2014.
And this woman comes over to me inside of a hall there, and she says, "Do you recognize me?" And I said, "No." And she had white hair. So she's hugging me, and she comes to my ear, and she sings a song I taught them when I was there in 69, 70. I was very touched by that.
So she was one of those kids?
Yes.
Oh, I'm going to cry right now.
It's just so lovely.
That's wonderful. Now, is this an approach that you often use in your filmmaking, where you get to know the community, you spend time there, you talk to people before even turning on the camera?
That's right. I do just interview like this, just sound, and until I feel I understand what the story is and that people get to be comfortable with me, I find that this much richer. By the time you go back with the camera, even I don't ask people to repeat themselves, but I will do interviews, and you put them on camera so the audience know who is talking to them. Mm-hmm. Then I can go back to my first sound, which is the audio that I did before. Because often people get very intimate, and they say things, sometimes it's the first time they tell, and they're very emotional, very beautiful. So you can go back to that sound and place it over different images that they're talking about. And it's very rich. Yeah.
I'd like to talk to you about what is considered your most well-known film. Ganasatake, 270 Years of Resistance, was released in 1993. It's a powerful documentary about what has become known in the mainstream as the Oka Crisis. You filmed the standoff between the Mohawk, the Quebec Police, and the Canadian Army. We're going to play a clip from that film.
These, you just said, they're allowed in there because it's nothing.
In Ganawage, the army raids the Longhouse, even though it had promised to stay out of the reserve once the Mercier Bridge was opened.
Why not? It's their house.
Sir, it's from order from higher.
He's welcome. They're welcome in.
Sir, it's from order from higher. No reporters, no television crews. Pass the court.
They all beat us. We were laying in ditches out there. We were fighting them. They were punching, believe me. They pulled my daughter's shirt right off.
He says we're welcome.
No, sir. The court has been established, sir. No photography crews, no media crews. Pass the court. Guys, sir, I don't ask questions. I just take orders, sir.
The 6 guys jumped me when I tried to stop them from going in the longhouse. They smashed my face with a butt in the back of the head, on my eye, back of my neck, my hand, it's all cut up.
That was a bit of Ganasatake, 270 Years of Resistance, a film by Alanis Obomsawin. You spent 78 days and nights at Ganasatake filming. Is there a moment that stands out when you think back on that time?
Well, there's lots of moments, especially when I went behind the barricade, when the army arrived and the warriors retreated to the treatment center. And the next day they put razor wire all around. And so that part was the most difficult part. And I was sleeping outside. I had just garbage bag on the ground and made myself a tent with other garbage bag. And it was cold at night, although it was summer. It's by a lake. It was quite cold. So I was there the whole time, and lots of things happen. But what I can say is it was lucky that they had traditional people who came in behind the barricade and really talked to the warriors in a much higher place, very spiritually and very intimately too. And they had ceremonies also. Also, I saw the warriors who stayed until the end to be so courageous and so generous also, and feeling it differently, especially the last few weeks there. They were feeling going more inside themselves, and those elders that came, there was a traditional chief and another man who was a pipe carrier. So the warriors, it was very special. And you could feel the change in the air just by the way the warriors were talking at the end. It was very different. When they came out, they burned their guns before coming out. And although it was rough because they were all arrested, but not to the point where there could have been people killed and badly beat up. So, and I think it really came from their minds where they were by the time they came out. Because during the crisis, all along, the warriors and the soldiers were often fighting and insulting each other. And it would get very scary because all you needed was one of them to shoot one bullet and we were finished. So you were always on guard and thinking about that. Yeah. And even me, the film board was telling me, you have to come out now, you have to come out now. And I wouldn't come out.
Why?
Because I was going to tell the story to the end. I came out on the 24th and they came out on the 26th so that I could protect all my tapes because I knew if I come out with them, they're going to confiscate all my material.
I heard somewhere that you were smuggling your tapes in and out of the barricaded area. Is that right?
Not me, but when I was first outside the barricade, I had we were shooting 16 millimeter at the time. I had a lot of tapes, and I had an electrician, and he would go out in and out, and he would take all my stuff out. And I'd say, as soon as you get to the film board, call me, make sure that all my material is there. But by the time I went behind the barricade, there was only me and a camera person who left me after a few days. Because he said, I'm not staying here, it's too dangerous. And then I was allowed another camera person, but after that was finished, when he left after 2 days, they said, no more. So I was on my own. I had 2 crews outside, but I was alone behind. And one cameraman passed me a video camera with food, So he showed me how to use it. I was doing the sound, I was doing interviews, and I was shooting with this camera. So when you see that film, at the end, the shots that are less professional, because I was shooting a video camera, it's like black and white. You can tell, this is a lower quality, but it's very important because otherwise we wouldn't have that.
When you say, I stayed because I wanted to tell the whole story, to the point where even the National Film Board can't pull you out and you're left with this little camera to do the work yourself, why was that so important for you?
Well, it was history. I felt it had to be recorded by one of us, and that's the reason.
You're so tenacious. You're just so tenacious.
If I know that I must do something, I do it. Yeah. If I believe in it, and it's for all people. When you have, you feel you want to make changes of any kind, and you want to perhaps develop a discipline or become a certain, whether it's an artist or a filmmaker, if you believe and if you're doing something just and honest, nobody can stop you. And nobody's going to make me think differently. I think everything is possible.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. I'm Alanis Obomsawin's guest on the show today, coming at you from her office at the National Film Board in Montreal, where she's worked for over 50 years. 5 decades of making films. You've traveled to many different Indigenous communities and shared those stories with people. What have you learned through these relationships, through the stories that you've told? What is the biggest treasure that you carry from that?
It's like a prayer when you listen to stories, especially old-timers. And I think in the old days, back in the village, maybe one person told a story. Nobody else would tell that story. You'd say, it's so-and-so story. And we have customs like for weddings, they would have a storyteller. And the storyteller would tell a story that everybody knows the story by heart. But he does it so well. You're just looking at this person and listening. It's everybody can tell stories. Our people have been telling stories for a very long time. Yeah. So I'm just one of them.
Do you see your filmmaking as activism?
Well, I've been called an activist since I'm, I don't know, very, very young. I've been called many names. I don't care.
Do you not like that term, activist?
My name is Alanis. I don't care. I certainly don't regret all my work and the decision I made. They were the right decision. Mm-hmm. Difficult, but right.
But you're extraordinary at it. And as you've said earlier, saying, things are very different now. There are so many different storytellers, genres, filmmakers out there, which is so exciting. How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's much higher than hope. I find that it's much more profound. You go around the country and people are interested. I would think that a large amount of the population want to see justice to our people. So it's very different. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it was, the Indians, they're always complaining. They're drunks and what are they doing? They're lazy. That's the kind of language we heard. Not now. And that's why if I die tomorrow, I worry less. Yeah, I think there's lots of love all over the country.
Alanis, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was the legendary Abenaki filmmaker Alanis Obomsawin talking to me from her office at the National Film Board in Montreal. Before we go, I've got a sneak listen to what we're working on for next week. F. Mister, as we have to call him on the radio, is an up-and-coming Inuk rapper. You can probably figure out what the F stands for. He's signed to Acclaimed Music, the Nunavut record label launched by Iqaluit group The Jerry Cans. F. Mister says, it's really exciting to be living in Iqaluit right now. There's so much art being made from music to theater to film.
After all that's going on, all the art that's building up in Nunavut, from like the Grizzlies movies to Kalgevut Theater, Performance Art Center, really changing the future for the kids, and I think we can make a much more exciting life for them, and I think they definitely feel excited about something new and exciting going on.
Speaking of that movie you just mentioned, the Grizzlies, 666 God just received a Canadian Screen Award for his song from that movie. And you've worked with him. How's it like to see other Inuk artists receiving that kind of recognition?
It's absolutely amazing. That's what I want to create, is a community of successful artists, whether I want to help the people who are already in the game or the people that I've started out with. And 666 God and Thomas, that's my boy. Like, we grew up together. Like, I've known him since we were probably like 4 or 5 years old, hanging out at the playground together, and for him to win the Canadian Screen Award for that song is just no words to describe. We're just so excited.
That was F. Mister, an up-and-coming Inuk rapper from Iqaluit. Next week on Unreserved, I sit down with him to talk about his music and life in Iqaluit. Don't miss the show on Sunday at 7 p.m. on CBC Radio 1 or on your CBC Radio app. That's it for this week's episode of Unreserved. We'll be back in this radio space next week for more community culture and conversation. This episode was produced by Zoe Tennant, Kyle Musica, Stephanie Cram, and Anna Lazowski. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at unreserved@cbc.ca or find us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm your favorite cousin, Rosanna Deerchild, coming at you from Winnipeg in Treaty 1 territory. Thank you for listening to Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I go say.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.